You're listening to The Extraction, conversations on the systems and strategies behind dental practice growth with Colin Ambler and Kyle Bergman.
Today we're going to talk about pre-appointment, and we've worked with hundreds and hundreds of practices, and what we find is that there's a big difference in people's gut feelings and what the data really shows. And this is a really big leak in practices. It's a very common pitfall, and we're going to show you how to fix that leak today.
You had a saying recently, show me your pre-appointment rate and I'll show you your future. And that is the title of our inaugural episode here on The Extraction. And yes, I got so excited I have to introduce myself. I'm Kyle, and we're here with CEO and co-founder of TeamCare, Colin, and we're coming to you live from different parts of the world. Colin is currently in Lahore, Pakistan, meeting with our engineering and development team, and I am in boring old Maryland, holding down the fort. How is Lahore?
Actually, we're in Faisalabad. It's about 2.5 hours outside of Lahore. Lahore is one of the major cities. Faisalabad is about the fourth biggest city in Pakistan. And as I've learned, it is a hotbed for tech talent. There's an amazing institution over here called FAST, and it produces some of the best developers in the region. They like to call it the subcontinent here, which includes India and Pakistan. And FAST is renowned across the subcontinent for producing and attracting top talent. It's really cool.
Very cool. Wow. So if you're listening to this and you're looking for incredible overseas talent, check out Faisalabad. All right, so let's jump right into our main segment. So you hear it all the time, Colin. Our pre-appointment rate is great, but it's really a big myth. Once we sync TeamCare to a practice's patient management software, we see something different. So can you talk a little bit about the genesis of the pre-appointment rate tool within TeamCare and what you're seeing with practices when they first join us?
Yeah, I'd love, this is one of my favorite topics, so I love to talk about it. And I think, that phrase, show me your friends, I'll show you your future, kind of relates right back to pre-appointment. And I think there's a commonality there where when you're in the heat of that and you're looking at your friends, and maybe it's, it kind of, that analogy's towards like teenagers that might not realize they're running around with the wrong gang, but it takes kind of like their parent to tell them that they're not objectively. Pre-appointment is something similar where a lot of people don't realize what's going on, and like their gut feeling, and they're in the throes of the practice, and the tolerance for this is extremely high or low, guys, depending on how you're looking at the numbers. But to retain patients, the bar is set at 97%, which means that the margin for error is very small. We can only afford to miss 3% of the patients to successfully complete this retention cycle. And so it requires a very sort of detailed internal process and tracking mechanism. Otherwise, staff members aren't really conscious about how often it's truly happening. And so I talk to practices all the time, and I love answering this question. I love asking them openly, how are you guys doing this? How do you think at what level percentage wise do you think you guys are performing at? And typically their gut reaction is 100%. We never miss someone. And we plug in TeamCare and we see the actual data and we start to realize it's a lot different.
And so now actually might be a good time. I know we talked about this right before we hopped on, for you to do a little screen share. And for those that aren't watching the video of this, we'll also just walk through what exactly we're looking at. But we're going to show you some real examples of what the holy grail looks like of 97% or greater versus true performance that we see initially when we sync. I think Dr. Sharon Blyler, co-founder of TeamCare, incredible mom, incredible business leader. And when you have parents that can show tough love, then the kids turn out all right. But sometimes when you let, you're blinded by, and that happens a lot with practice owners. Oh, I know everything's going well, but there's this false sense of security.
Yeah, pre-appointments is such an analogy of life. and parenthood. And I picked a couple of random examples, so hopefully they serve well. I'm looking at a group right here, and I have a couple, but this is a group based out of California. And this is an example of a poor pre-appointment job. And this is our dashboard. We'll show another example that's quite a bit better. So what we see in this dashboard is that there was 197 patients seen, and that 80% of them were pre-appointed. And what that means is that 39 of them were not pre-appointed. That's what we really care about the most. And the reason that we care about this the most is that we consider these 39 patients to just be gone from our practice. If we don't set them up with a future appointment, there's a very, very low likelihood that these patients will return on their own, just by randomly remembering in 6 months that they'll return to the dentist.
Got it.
So I'm going to shift and show another example of a practice that's doing this at a very high level. And here we go, pre-appointment. So this is a practice that's seeing even more volume. They're seeing 622 patients, and they've achieved this 97% benchmark. And out of 622 patients, they've only allowed 19 of those patients to leave without a future appointment. So this is a great job. I know this office manager personally, and she has just made this part of the cultural fabric at the office. And I think that's really the most important piece. This has to be part of every patient interaction that you see, and it's something that is just always at the top of mind when you're getting ready to hand off a patient to the next person or dismiss a patient from the practice. There's always a final check that says, does this person have a future hygiene appointment?
Amazing. And you just touched on one of the bigger macro trends that we'll continue to talk about, and that's how you can use data to influence a positive culture impact on a practice and create more of a performance mindset. And you can also do that with more accountability and more transparency. And so if you can't see the screen that we're looking at, it's showing very clearly how many patients came in and the percentage of those patients that left with an appointment. There's a box to the right that shows people that were not pre-appointed. And so right here, this would be insightful and helpful for a lot of practices. But you might be saying, so what? What can I do with this? Great, those 19 people. But where TeamCare takes it to another level is if Colin clicks on those 19 people, it's going to pull up exactly who those people were, who they saw in the practice, what procedures they had done, and it also gives the team an opportunity to reach out to them and also to understand internally from a process standpoint, why did those people leave without an appointment? And so it's not just showing you what happened, but it's also giving you an opportunity to influence what could happen in the future and improve process loops as well with your team. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. The starting point of this feature, this was one of our first ones just because we knew how important it was to the growth of the practice. This kind of progressed in its build out and the development of it as something that started off on with very much manual work and spreadsheets. This is not a stat that your Dentrix or your Open Dental will give you. It's a very like consulting side stat that you really have to harvest out of the data. And we started to look at each day and look at the patients that came into the office, what patients actually attended hygiene appointments today. And out of those appointments that attended today, how many of them had a future hygiene appointment? And so, many offices might still be doing this where they're manually checking one patient at a time throughout the day to try to identify those patients that left without a future appointment. And it becomes I mean, it's really powerful what you can do with technology once you have this. And once, it's like we were doing this on spreadsheet, but it became so much more powerful once we became integrated into the practice management software. And number one, sometimes, like I told you, when we talk to practice owners for the first time, their gut feeling is that they're doing this at 100% level. And many times they're doing it at like an 80% level. They're losing 20% of their patients period over period. And I found that it was really important to give them the detail of this before they believed me. If we simply displayed a number and said 19 patients, they said, I don't believe it. TeamCare is wrong. And so he said, okay, fine, we'll show you. And so a lot of the times when people see these patients for the first time, it's a huge aha moment that, oh, wow, I can really see this now. We even allow you to look into deeper into the patient appointments to show, okay, what appointments do they have? What appointments are scheduled? And oftentimes when we open this section, we look at this scheduled area and it shows exactly like this example. There's a banner that tells them there's no appointment scheduled. This person doesn't have a doctor's appointment, not a hygiene appointment. This person left the office without an appointment altogether. And that's just needs to be a cardinal sin when you're running a practice. Nobody should leave without a next appointment. It's like some people will need treatment. They need the filling, crown, root canal, whatever that is. A lot of people don't. We find about 50% of people need treatment, 50% don't. And regardless, every single person should always have a future hygiene appointment. There should always be something on the book 6 months from now so that they're going to come back into your office. And if they don't have a future appointment again, there's a really good likelihood that they're not going to have an alarm set on their calendar that says, oh, I need to go to the dentist. And every patient that you do not pre-appoint, that does not have an appointment, creates more work in the reactivation world. It's like you got to hassle down that patient. You got to call that patient, text that patient. It's really hard to recover this. The path of least resistance is really just to make it a process and a procedure that happens at a super high level like this practice. 97%, all these people are getting pre-appointed into the schedule so that they'll come back to you in 6 months.
In your experience, talk, Colin, about how you were initially doing this in spreadsheets. How many practices that you work with initially are even tracking pre-appointment rates at all?
Mm, that's that's what keeps me up at night, Kyle. That's the scary part. It's like, we're in the business of helping practices grow, and this will really be an Achilles heel. It's like, just imagine 20% of your schedule dumping out, period over period. And this is where a lot of practices get caught into that hamster in a wheel cycle where, they're losing about 20% of their hygiene by lack of pre-appointment. And they have to recuperate all of that through new patients. And new patients are far more expensive and difficult to convert than returning patients. If you think about it, returning patients, they have a relationship with you. They've already been to the office. They've already done their new patient paperwork. They've already got their insurance verified. They already know the office, the staff. They're already comfortable. You've already diagnosed, the treatment in them. Their chart is built out, ready to go, and they already have a connection with you. And a new patient is a lot more work to intake, to onboard, and when you don't do this pre-appointment at a high level, there's just this constant churn rate. It's something that practices are spending a lot of dollars on marketing with the hope to grow. And what happens is they spend all those marketing dollars to replace. They're just replacing their losses one period after another. They're losing and gaining the same 20%. It's like we see a lot of new patients be about 20% of hygiene. And we see a lot of, unfortunately, pre-appointment rates be at a loss of 15, 20%. And it just makes a lot of sense. We're losing and we're gaining the same 50, whatever patients every single period. People can't, they're not getting that breakthrough trajectory. They're not breaking through that glass ceiling. And it's really because of that pre-appointment rate. And there's a couple other pieces in that breakout velocity, but pre-appointment's number one. It's just simply the math is simply not possible if people don't keep a close eye on this.
So if you're only tracking visits and production, you're already behind. The real indicator of practice health, according to Colin, who works with over 500 practices on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, is pre-appointment rate. And no, yours probably isn't good right now, at least. So what this really comes down to, if we were to zoom out for a second, what this really comes down to is accountability. Without a system to track what's happening, you're just kind of going with your gut, it sounds like. And that is dangerous to do. And also, going with your gut is really difficult to scale because it's not transferable. You're not showing your team members at your practice what the pre-appointment rate is, and therefore there's no transparency. So
Yeah,
how?
I think
Yeah,
Kyle, like you've always impressed me with your business background and your entrepreneurship, and I think we're so fortunate and lucky and excited to have you part of our team. But I think maybe it's interesting to think about this from, you have a lot of background in the e-commerce business, and pre-appointment is kind of a synonym for repeat customer. It's like
100%.
who doesn't want to have a repeat customer? Like, do you in any business, like, do you want to have a one trick pony that someone just comes in, has one visit, leaves, and never comes back? Or is it every business owner's intention to make their customers so happy that they want to come back? And I think that's a little rhetorical. I want you to talk about it, but it's almost like it's not in this dental environment. It's not the fault of the customer. The patient is likely happy. They probably had a great experience, and it's the office that shot themselves in the foot just by not handing them an appointment card that said, "Hey, I made this appointment for you in 6 months. We'll see you then." Simple as that.
Yeah. I'm always hesitant to talk about the e-commerce world because I could go off on a tangent and want to be mindful of our listeners that might be speaking German to a bunch of Polynesians. But I think TeamCare, it's hard to put TeamCare into a box, but one of the things about it is it does remind me of an incredible email marketing tool. Email marketing, when you're emailing people that have purchased with you before, the cost to get them to purchase again is significantly lower than it would be to spend money on a Facebook ad or a Google ad or do any sort of new customer acquisition. And so that's
Hmm.
one of the things that TeamCare does.
Yep.
So
And one thing
how
I guess that I also want to kind of mention is like there can be a lot of like an overwhelming amount of KPIs. And I think, you have your analogies from other business worlds. And I think, part of the game is to simplify this, to distill this practice growth down to a very simple game that we can like execute and scale on. And it's like it can feel overwhelming to have, oh, I have to worry about this, I have to worry about that, my collection ratio or my commonly focus on. I forget the title of it, but the premise was about high leverage tasks. It's like what are the things that if you and you can expand on this, it's like if you put in, some amount of work, what when you apply that to different, parts of your business, what's going to yield the greatest result for that unit of time? And I think this pre-appointment is one of the most high leverage KPIs that can be focused on. If practice owners did just this and focused on this every single day, they would be far better off than focusing on almost any other metric. Like this will yield the most growth over time and in compounding fashion. We talk about the growth of a practice, and we talk about it under the currency of hygiene. And unfortunately, we see practices stagnated for decades. They stay at 200 hygiene appointments per month for 10 years. They never break out and get to a growth state. And that's the hamster in the wheel. They keep doing the same thing, having the same result. And if they just change this one thing, they could, one of the other favorite lines I have is that hygiene, you should be having your best month every month. You should be, this month, 100 appointments, 6 months from now, 120, 6 months from then, 150. It has the distinct potential to be an increasing and exponentially growing number. Why would we have less or the same in 6 months than we do today if we have new patients coming in and we retain all the time? And so it's like, if practices focus on this and think about this as one of the most high leverage monitoring things that they can do, this single thing has the potential to grow your practice exponentially. And if it's neglected, you'll stay in the hamster in the wheel for years on end. Unfortunately, I've seen it all the time.
Oh, yes. Yes, we have. And I think the book that you're referring to is High Output Management by the late and great Andy Grove. Great book if you haven't read it and you're into business things. One thing I got to give Colin credit for is I give him all these suggestions, and then he actually reads all of them and does all the things, which I don't know anyone else that is as good of a student as he is when it comes to these types of books
And
and
quite
stuff.
often, quite often apply them to some aspect of team care.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like if people don't know, TeamCare was built out of personal necessity first. These were the monitoring tools that we needed and wanted to have on our own, and that became unscalable and like, unmaintainable on a spreadsheet system. One of the things that you talked about was the accountability side of this. And that is really crucial. I think that I want to touch on that. It's like in some of these practices where we have a poor pre-appointment rate. I'm gonna pull up a screenshot again. One of the questions that begs is, okay, if I pre-appointed at 80%, like who did it? Where did it go wrong? Who's the person that's letting all these patients leave? Is it and so it's one thing to know what this number is, and then it's another thing to try to correct it and try to figure out where this leak is coming from. And so one of the things that is just never, ever, ever possible on a spreadsheet based system is individual accountability. And we do that through our leaderboards. It's on the hygienist leaderboard. It's on the front desk. And so by nature, it's like as this thing progresses and evolves and you get out of spreadsheets, you really unlock like limitless potential on how you can ask a database to tell me who was involved in which appointments. And so on our leaderboard, have individualized. Every hygienist, every front desk person has a metric about their individual pre-appointment. And so I think this really creates a level of accountability, and you have the same ability to click on this and look at the detail of patients. And it forces people to be conscious. And, again, leaderboards are an amazing tool to make people want to do better, and to not have a bad performance reflected amongst their peers.
It's really incredible, and people that are listening, keep us honest. This is a podcast that is sponsored and hosted by TeamCare. So yeah, we understand that we're in a little bit of an echo chamber, but at the same time, Colin built this after years of pain and suffering and not having the right tools that he needed to do his job, and more importantly, for his team to do their job to their best ability. And that's what TeamCare is providing. At the end of the day, we kind of joke internally about this because one day I said, Colin, I think that TeamCare is like a human performance tool. And he said, what do you mean? That's not, you're using your e-commerce marketing shenanigans. But I still really believe that because of the transparency and accountability that it's providing that you can't find anywhere else within the dental industry specifically, but there's a lot of industries that are tangential to dental that also could probably benefit from this type of transparency. We're coming to the end of our first episode, and if you leave with one thing, I think it's this. And Colin, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you want to grow your practice, you don't need net new patients. No, you need to keep the ones that you already have, that you've already worked hard to acquire at some point in the recent past. Your pre-appointment rate tells you whether you're building a future or you're just filling today's holes. And if you want to see your real pre-appointment rate, do you know your real pre-appointment rate right now? And if you don't and you want to see it, TeamCare makes it really simple and actionable to do that. So you can visit teamcaredental.com and check it out, and you will almost get either myself or Colin walking you through it. Colin,
Yeah,
any last words that you want to?
yeah, I can't help myself. So definitely, if there's people out there, listeners that don't really know what their true rate is, that might be keeping this on a spreadsheet or some other system, like go on our website. We have a free trial. You can plug up your practice management system. You can see these results today, no cost. We want to help you. We want to expose these numbers, and we don't want any kind of price to be a barrier. And the last thing, the last parting message that I want to tell people is that there is this has the potential, and we have tons of practices that are at this level of where this system is managing itself. It's not something that it's self-policing. Team members are very conscious, very aware, very accountable to their own pre-appointment score, and that's what's great. It has to be driven from individual efforts, but it does start at the managerial level to set the bar. Practice owners, office managers, you need to impress upon your teams that 90% is not okay. 85% is not okay. This is not a test score. This is not like, I got a B plus or I got an A minus. Like the only acceptable level is 97%. And you have to make that the bar for your staff members to reach towards. It has to be 97%. You have to have an extremely high tolerance for getting this at a very high level.
Amen. 97%. Well, Colin, thank you very much for joining me from Faisalabad.
Our dev team is awesome here, and it's been like the Pakistani culture has been very hospitable, very welcoming. It's been a great experience.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and we're excited to chat again with you soon about all things dental. Take care, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you for listening to The Extraction with Colin Ambler and Kyle Bergman. Read episode notes and transcripts at teamcaredental.com.